Hi, everybody. It's James here, and I'm here with my co-host, Randy. Hi, Randy. Today, we
Everyone.
want to discuss conformity and nonconformity. And basically, the question here is, when should you do what other people are doing? Why should you do what other people have done across time? And when can you safely and reasonably consider going your own separate way? And I guess we're going to come at this from several angles. There's the paths that you follow in your life in terms of going to school, getting a job, getting married, things like that. And then there are more detailed issues of when do you go along with a process at work, for example, and when can you feel good about challenging it? And then there's a third dimension. So there's where you choose to conform or non-conform, work, life, and then there's conformity versus non-conformity at different stages of your life. How should you think about it when you're a young person, when you're middle-aged, when you're older? And that I just covered a lot there, but let's see. How do we want to get into this topic, Randy?
The truth is, I was in the military for most of my life, and nonconformity is not an option in most cases. We have rules in the military and regulations, and they're very clear and written out, and there's many books that you have to be aware of. And if you don't conform, if you try, there's hair standards, there's clothes standards, you can believe whatever you want, but you also can't. It's not really, you can't really compare that to the normal world. You could be punished
No,
if you
but I
don't.
like it. It's a good place to start because you're right. The military is also stereotypically, but just from what you described, the ultimate arena of conformance. You must go along with the written rules and regulations or you will be punished. Why do you suppose the military insists upon conformity to that extent? What do you think is the rationale and what are the benefits if you have thought about this?
I haven't thought about it too much because I just did follow the rules. But probably the most obvious one is if you have conformity, then you can have everyone focus on the mission and you don't have to worry about people wearing whatever they want to wear, or there's a reason why you can't have certain clothing on because it's not flame retardant, for instance. And there's a reason. I'm not sure what the reason. Oh, there's a reason why you can't have facial hair because you can't seal your chemical gas mask in times of that. So there's all these rules in place that people wanted to violate. And you, especially if you're brand new in the military, you don't even understand. And this kind of goes to what we're going to talk about, right? If you don't understand the reasons behind it, how can you request for a change hey, I want to grow a beard. Why can't I grow a beard? You won't be able to seal your mask, so therefore you'll die. Those are some things that I think the military considered. I think the biggest one is just like, hey, we have a mission to do. And if everyone has to dress and look the same, then we don't have to worry about policing them up if they're doing something that doesn't make sense. These are the regulations, they're in place also to look professional so that we're treated as professionals when we're working with other elements and other nations. But I think that's the big one for the military.
In my experience, there is almost always at least one reason and typically multiple reasons why a system and rules were put in place. I don't think the corporate world is as strict or as militant as the military, if I can say it that way, but we also have and love rules and procedures, right? And those rules and procedures are going to be different from company to company. Some are more strict than others, but every company is going to have rules and procedures. And almost without fail, new employees, part of the acculturization process is them just realizing, oh, this is how this company works. These are the rules and requirements that I have here. I observe frequently that people come in and they resist those rules. They chafe against those rules because honestly, some of them make more sense than others. It is worthwhile, and this is my first piece of advice, when you come across a rule that seems to be restrictive and maybe unnecessarily restrictive, to recognize your feelings and say, oh, I'm bothered by this rule, but to then pause and say, accept the idea that there is a reason for that rule, and then to wonder what the reason for that rule is. You can criticize it anyway without understanding the context, but you're going to be much more effective if you understand the context first. And here's something else I observed, and the reason why it's good to be thoughtful before you simply challenge a rule out of sheer stubbornness. Companies do and countries and everybody who puts in place rules, sometimes those rules get out of date. You'll find all sorts of silly laws on the books that say you can't eat an orange in a bathtub with a donkey after 6 o'clock in this town. So there was a reason for that, but do we really still need that rule? No, maybe not. And same thing with your company, and maybe less so the military, but even the military probably changes its rules over time. Certainly in the corporate context, I can tell you that I was always on the lookout for, does this rule still make sense? I knew usually the context because I was the one who had the right to rule or updated. I was very aware of the context, but sure, circumstances change. And I would listen to the people who came and said, look, I know why this rule was in place. I know it did this back then. And now here's a suggestion for how we can accomplish the same objective even better. And if you can come at it from that approach, then I think it's not nonconformity so much as just constructive helping the organization achieve its objectives.
Yeah. And these rules that people conform or don't conform to have to be adapted over time. And that's not lost on the military as well. You have the last place I worked had a bunch of civilians, had just as many civilians working there as military. And the
Hmm.
military clothing of the day by regulation was their camouflage uniform. But that's not considered business or even business casual. That's considered casual because that's what we wear to work on in the motor pool underneath the vehicles. That's what we wear when we go to combat. It's not considered our business casual or business suit. The civilians were required to wear suits or the women equivalent of suit. And they had some guidelines on what that was. And the civilians said that they were government employees, but they weren't military. And they said it wasn't fair. And they went to the supervisors like, why are we required to wear suits? You have to look professional. It's like, you are wearing your camouflage, which is not even business casual, considered casual. And that's what you're wearing on a daily basis. But we have to wear suits, and that like the cleaning, we have to purchase them out of our own pocket and everything. And so it's not fair. Why are we doing this? And so there was a big conflict for a long time and that went back and forth. And I don't think it was resolved before I left, but it wasn't a super big military rule. It was an internal rule that the general, because he's the guy in charge, signed off on because it was done before the general before him, the general before him. And so then people had to get involved and say, why do we do this? Does this make sense? And things like that. When I look at it from outward looking in, and they were right, but I didn't want to wear my dress uniform every day with all my medals and everything like that. Probably because the same reason they didn't want to wear their suits, because you had to get them, you had to look nice and you had to clean them and everything and get them pressed. So in my opinion, I like right on, but yeah, so that's all that.
So I think it would be interesting to discuss what are some reasons that it's appropriate to conform and what are some reasons why and when it's not to. And I'll tell you what I have in mind here, Randy. We've been focusing on the organization's needs and the fact that rules are put in place for a reason. But let's focus on your individual desires and interests. If you're a person coming into a situation, what are some reasons why you might say, yeah, actually, I'm going to follow the existing rules, conform, in other words? I would think of two reasons off the top of my head. One is that the rules or the procedure actually are beneficial. So by following them, that gives you the greatest possibility of being successful. So if the procedure is before you shoot a weapon, you first make sure that the barrel is clear. That procedure exists for a reason. It's going to give you the greatest chance of the gun not blowing up in your face. Or in another context, I shouldn't talk about stuff that's outside my area of expertise. You'll tell me if I'm wrong, but in life, right? You should go to school, get your degree, start working before you get married. People chafe against that particular advice all the time because they say, those traditional bourgeois values, I'm not going to follow those. They are correlated with a great deal of success in life in terms of both material wealth and emotional well-being. And so before you reject the traditional path out of hand, you could say, actually, it's correlated with a great deal of success. So point one for why you might consider conforming is the method is proven to be historically successful. Point two is in the specific context in which you find yourself, conforming might also contribute to your success in that environment. So if you're the person who is not a suck up or a brown nose, but someone who is a good corporate citizen, if I could say it that way, your bosses are happy, you're not causing trouble, you're getting stuff done, It's a way to succeed individually within the system sometimes by not bucking the system. So there's the objective success. Hey, this method works. And then there's success in the context where you are going along and people appreciate it, including your bosses. So those would be two suggestions I have for reasons why you might wish to conform. Any comment on that?
I think less of a comment, more of advice, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I always think it's a good idea when you're a new person coming into a new work environment to conform and observe and try to understand why everything's working the way it is, and then start offering suggestions about changing. And I don't know if that's nonconformity, if you offer suggestions to change, and then the new conforming rules are the conformity. But I'm maybe it's my military background, but I'm pretty much against, if you mean by nonconformity, just like going in there and breaking the rules. And no, I'm going to get a tattoo on my face because I want one, even though that was advised against to in my initial briefing or something like that. So I'm not sure how you're defining nonconformity as far as I'm just going to go there and blatantly break rules, or I'm going to be a trendsetter. It's not really in the rules, but no one's doing it. But I want to do it. So I'm going to do something different. And I may get talked to by my supervisor. I may have to stop it later on, but I'm just going to do whatever I can and whatever I want to until someone says something.
Nonconformity, first of all, your advice and echo and support in the sense of it is respectful is the wrong word. It is a successful strategy, in my view, to take the time to understand as much as you can why an organization does something, including, by the way, just asking a genuine question. Hey, I don't understand why we have this dumb rule or this rule. Can you tell me more about it? That's a way to work together with your organization and not fight it. So that's good advice, Randy. And it also will absolutely increase your odds of then successfully steering change if it turns out a rule doesn't make sense anymore. You don't do it by first breaking the rule, usually. Nonconformism, I think we could define as simply bucking the majority trend in the sense of I'm going to do something different than what the majority of people do. And you see it oftentimes in the context of what I'll call youthful resistance. So instead of wearing the same clothes that everybody else does, you're going to wear ripped and torn clothes. Or instead of getting your hair cut the same way everyone does, you're going to dye yours color or get a mohawk. And I don't even know if those are out of the mainstream now, but they used to be when we were growing up, right? Something that was very different than what the most people did. That's the simplest way I could think of to define nonconformism.
So against a rule, just against what
Correct.
everyone else is doing, and then you're going to stand out, and then maybe they'll make a rule against it because you did it.
And I think standing out is, in fact, one of the primary motivators for nonconformism, certainly youthful nonconformism. Someone says, I don't want to be molded. I don't want to do what everybody else does. I'm an individual. I want to follow my own path. Therefore, I'm going to pierce some part of my body or whatever all the ways are that people choose to express themselves. I think one of the key psychological motivators seems to be just, I wish to be seen as an individual. I want to stand out. And so that can be, I said before, we should talk about reasons to conform. And now here's some reasons potentially to non-conform. Yeah, if you want to have exceptional results, you might need to do something different than everybody else has done. You might need to be the first person to try a new approach. And so what if 99 people who've tried that approach or done something differently failed miserably? You might be the one to reach the top of the mountain first without oxygen, or start a new company that becomes a huge success, or have your YouTube channel become a viral sensation exactly because you did something different. So in a little bit, I guess the sense is that if you don't take any risks, you're not going to have a significant better outcome. You also are much more likely to have a significant worse outcome. But if you're willing to take those risks, yeah, then nonconformity can absolutely be a path to a different and better future.
I feel like we're talking about two different levels too. We're talking about conformity in a organization, and then we're talking about conformity and if you're like at a higher level making business decisions and you're trying to improve your business by being a nonconformist.
Taking risks that make you stand out. So you're right. There is conformity to rules and procedures. There's conformity in higher level decisions, and there's conformity in basic life questions. And we are talking about them, I suppose, at all these different levels. And I suppose it comes down to a little bit assessing what kind of environment and situation you're in. I always think about risk taking in the context of not just what is the potential upside, but is there a downside that outweighs the upside? So again, if there's a small cost to following a rule, there's not much downside to following it. And if there's a humongous risk, so let's say you say, I like the feeling of wind in my hair. I'm going to ride my motorcycle without a helmet. Okay. You get some upside, but there's a pretty gigantic downside to you. And you could say, no one's going to tell me what to do. Fine. You're playing a significant risk that is maybe not outweighed by the upside if you were to think of it in that fashion.
I I think so. I think if we turn this
I just
around,
insulted everybody who doesn't wear a helmet on their motorcycle, but sorry about that. Go
so
ahead.
if we turn this around and talk about business leaders and managers, supervisors, and you have new people coming in, I've found that if you have rules and regulations for reasons, especially if other people in the past have broken them for whatever reason, if you explain why they're in place instead of just saying, hey,
Yeah.
we have a policy in the military that if you want to travel outside of it's different for every base, but if you want to travel outside of a 200-mile radius of where you work, you have to notify your supervisor. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is we may have an emergency and we want to know we need to bring everyone in. If we can't communicate, we without before cell phones is a lot more difficult, but we couldn't get a
Mhm.
hold of you, or there's a hurricane or a tornado hit or something, and had to get accountability of everyone because we were worried about everyone and their families, and we couldn't get a hold of you. We The fact that you were 200 miles away or in 3 states over, would everyone's stressed out about where you are. We have people going to your house. We have people calling the police because that's the way the military works. And when I lived overseas in Colombia, especially, you had to tell anyone anytime you left the city, the because the capital city, because everyone lived there, and you had to file forms saying where you were going, because the embassy got continuous 24-hour intelligence reports about where insurgents were fighting or bombing, or there was a potential bomb. I got a call once that said, hey, we have a threat that says they're going to put a bomb on an airline called Avianca today. So tell everyone not to take a flight today. If they're taking a flight on Avianca today, to get off it and don't go anywhere today. And I were actually on the phone calling people going, where are you? Oh, I'm about to get on my plane. No, turn around. But these were important things. But if I told people that and just said, hey, you need to tell me whenever you leave the city, and they came in from Texas to work in Colombia for 6 months. And I'm like, hey, if you ever leave Bogota, you need to fill paperwork out and get permission and things like that. And they're like, the hell, I'm a grown man. Why can't I go wherever the hell I want? And same thing for 200 miles, nothing ever happens until it does. And now I can't get a hold of you. And now you're in violation of this rule. And you've caused a lot of pain,
Yep.
people trying to find you, wasted manpower, and now you're punished. And so these are, if you explain all that up front, and I've actually had people where I gave a brief that usually people gave in 10 minutes. Hey, I'm just going to read these things out. Don't do these things. But I gave an hour brief. And then some people have come up to me as, thank you for explaining all that stuff. That's the first time anyone ever explained why these rules are in place. And first of all, you'll get more compliance to the rules, so that people are more likely to conform, especially for rules that are really important to your business success or security or safety. And second of all, they can ask the questions right then and maybe take note of them and say, that's a good idea. Maybe this is an old rule. Maybe we need to take this up and see if we need to change it.
Yes. And I like that you added this element, Randy. We started by saying if you're the individual facing a situation, you owe it to yourself to think it through and ask what the reasons might be. But your addition now is, as a leader, it is extremely helpful if you take the time to, maybe not with every single thing, but certainly for some of the important rules, to explain what's the context, why they're there, both because it enhances people's compliance, but also because it creates a feedback opportunity for people to help make that rule better. I also think that if you have demonstrated your sensibility even a few times by explaining rules in that fashion and showing that there's some thought behind them, it increases people's willingness to follow your other rules, even if you haven't explained them to that level of detail. So they say, oh, I know Randy's not a total psycho just trying to control us. He's thoughtful. So if he tells me, even though we didn't have time for a briefing on this one, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that there's a reason for this rule if there's a marginal case. So there are benefits all around to respecting people as well and not just forcing them because you can to comply with your rules, even if there's a good reason.
I would add one thing on the opposite side about the individuals not conforming. Look around and say, I want to do this. Other people aren't doing this. What could possibly go wrong if I do this? And the example would be this guy once again in Colombia had a brand new dog that wasn't trained, and he had an SUV, and for some reason he decided not to put the dog in a box, a kennel or something in the back of his SUV. He let it roam wild, and it was wanted to play with him, and it was in his lap. And so in Bogota at the time, we all got issued bulletproof vehicles at the time when I was down there in the like 2010, 2008, stuff like that, because for safety issues. And so you didn't bring your own car there. You got a bulletproof SUV. This is your car. But the dog's wrestling with him and he has an accident. And they're like, what happened? It's like, oh, my dog was like in my lap and was wrestling with me and I couldn't pay attention to an accident. To me, that would be obvious what you should have done. And it wasn't obvious. He wanted to do it. He's like, oh, I don't want to put my dog in a box. But now the military being like it is, they made a rule. You
Yep.
have to have all your dogs in a box. So before, when we had those of us who had well-behaved dogs, we're like, I don't want to knock on in the box either, but I know he's not going to attack me. Just think about the purpose behind those rules. And if, like I said, like you said, if you don't understand, feel free to ask and say, hey, why is this rule in place? Because it seems kind of arbitrary or something like that.
I guess this question comes up in other contexts. I have, as you have, lived in countries around the world with different cultures, different senses of individual rights and freedom versus conforming to authority. The US is a country where there's quite a bit of individual feelings, where people have a strong sense of individuality. And I often refer to it as the you can't tell me what to do attitude. And that's great. In a way, it's made America what it is. But it contrasts with places like Germany or Switzerland, where there's a much more heavy top down. You have to register everywhere you live. You have to tell them what you're doing. They keep a close eye on things. There are rules about when, you can mow your lawn and you can't mow it on certain days and at certain times. And to a person coming from the US in particular, it can seem very stifling. And those rules are silly and restrictive. And I would say I've grown to appreciate over the years that there is a happy balance somewhere in the middle. If you allow individuality to run rampant, then some people are going to take advantage of it and make life unpleasant for everybody else. People who let their dogs roam free, maybe not just harming themselves, but potentially harming others. And on the other side, too much restriction in your life and having everything controlled by the government is no fun either. So the idea that a little bit of law and order is to the benefit of everyone, not just yourself. This is the concept I'm trying to tease out, that you're not the only one affected by your conformance or nonconformance with rules. It actually has an impact on other people. And sometimes the purpose of a rule is indeed to ensure that there's a balance between your freedoms and your impact on everyone else. I'll give you another example. And it's something I observed just walking around. In Switzerland, there are noise ordinances on how loud a muffler can be on a vehicle, how loud the vehicle can be, and they enforce them like crazy. If your car or motorcycle has an inappropriate muffler, they will stop you, they'll fine you, and then maybe even confiscate your vehicle until they can remove the offending
Good for
muffler.
them.
In the US, I cannot walk down a single street without ridiculously loud motorcycles and music and trucks, and it's offensive, right? That person who's driving by blaring their music at a level that you can hear inside behind closed doors they're being a nonconformist, right? They're enjoying themselves, but at what cost to the hundreds and thousands of people who hear them as they're cruising around the neighborhood? And that's an example where there's no right or wrong answer, but I guess the culture that you're in, maybe the way I would get at it is, are you being a nonconformist with the idea of improving your own life? And are you doing so in a way that impacts others? Or are you doing it because you're a jerk and you are looking to be deliberately provocative or offensive?
I agree. I agree totally. And I have the same problem here in Romania where like, why are you so loud? And I'll give you one final, maybe a final military story about conformity and nonconformity. And probably no lesson, but it's an entertaining story. First time I went to Afghanistan, 2022, 6 or 7 months after 11. And we flew in from North Carolina to Germany and refueled in Germany and then flew the rest of the way in. And so we got out in Germany. And when we loaded up the plane in the US, we had our individual weapons. I had my pistol at my side. I had my rifle slung. I had magazines full, and not in the rifle or anything, but full. I had grenades. I had a knife. I was going to combat, right? That's what I thought. I still think I was going to combat even now.
Yes.
So I get to Germany and we're in the waiting area, and then we got to get back on the plane, and they make us go through the metal detector.
Oh,
And we also carried out, we didn't leave our guns, our other guns. We had more guns than we could carry. We had machine guns and stuff. We didn't leave them in there. We took them out. We had to spend the night there. So we took them out and secured them and had people guard them. And then we brought them back. So the next day we brought them back, and they're making us go through the metal detector and put the boxes through, and they barely fit. It's annoying in some ways. And I'm like, why are we doing this? We have to check. What are you checking for? We're checking for firearms. Got them. We're checking for explosives. Got those too. Checking for knives. I have those. Present. So why do I have to why do we have to bottleneck this thing to go through this? What are you going to find in there on your little screen that's going to say, hey, stop the machine. This is the process. But why are we doing this? It's slowing everything down. And then finally we did it. Went all the way through. And they're like, hey, you got to put your guns in the box. Because I put the guns on the rail, and then I was going to pick them up on the other side. It's like, why? He's like, you can't go armed onto the airplane. I was like, the airplane's going to land in Afghanistan where there's a war going on. Why wouldn't I be able to carry the guns off the airplane? That makes no sense. And this is the policy. You can't get on a plane. Who made the policy? This policy's been in place forever. I was like, before 9/11, probably even. Everyone does this. It's like, it's dumb. Do you honestly think that I'm going to get on the plane and not take the gun out of the box? You're not allowed to have open guns on the box. I jump out of airplanes every day with a gun on my body, not in a box. So what are we talking about here? I almost got arrested because I was in charge of all these guys. I'm like, what are we doing? You can't have a grenade on the plane. It's like, why?
There is a lesson there, which is that mindless adherence to procedures and rules when they obviously don't make sense is one of the most frustrating things that can encounter people. When you can obviously see, hey, I understand there is a reason for this process, but under these circumstances, it makes no sense. Then it's very difficult to display the kind of patience and context and, I'll take the bigger picture and I'll understand. You can't do it always, right? So sometimes when a rule is obviously wrong, then maybe you do need to find a way to defy it in a way. And it sounds like those circumstances are ones where you had good reason. All right. So I think our advice generally is conformism versus nonconformism is an issue that comes up often in life. It comes up when you're young and trying to figure out what you want to do. It comes up when you're in business. It comes up, actually, I find all the time. And our general advice is to consider the context, be thoughtful, accept that there's probably a reason for the rule. There's a way to challenge rules in a more effective way rather than justifying them, notwithstanding what we just said. And it's useful to spend a little bit of time thinking about what's your approach to conformism versus nonconformism.
I agree. Yes.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Talk to you next time.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.